widespread, or is it something that is relatively rare?
You're pounding him over the word widespread. I just would ask you,
Scott,
what is your tolerance for any fraud at all?
Is it widespread?
Absolutely. Over 6,000 people.
What is your bar for widespread?
She said, my bar is I want no tolerance. Okay. I have zero tolerance.
So what is your tolerance for American citizens?
By the way, this isn't the only place this is happening.
What is your tolerance for American citizens whose valid...
A tense debate erupts on CNN's Newsnight after Scott Jennings raises allegations of large-scale voter fraud involving registration records in New Jersey. Phillip responds by stripping the claim down to the underlying data, challenging the panel to separate verifiable facts from partisan messaging. We're going to examine the most important parts of that exchange, compare the evidence with the arguments being presented, and break down where each side's case holds up or falls apart. Before we roll the clip, take a moment to support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you never miss another breakdown. With that said, let's get straight into it.
2023. Nearly 3 years before I became governor, a serious software error in New Jersey's motor vehicle system led to the improper voter registration of what we believe to be roughly 6,600 people in our state. In the case of this error, some individuals indicated that they weren't citizens and weren't eligible to vote, but the software registered them anyway.
The governor said that about 400 of those people cast ballots, but there's no evidence at this time that any elections were swayed. She made the surprise disclosure just days after President Trump's address to the nation, where he claimed that hundreds of thousands of non-citizens are on the rolls across the country. Sherrill promised accountability and said that the vendor responsible for the system is being replaced. She also took a swipe at the president.
As the Trump administration tries to weaponize elections for political gain, I am ensuring that we protect our elections. Let me be clear. Donald Trump has zero credibility on the issue of election integrity.
The White House obviously seized on the news to help push Trump's voter ID bill, writing, quote, "Democrat glitch registers thousands of non-citizens to vote. Another reason to pass the Save America Act." This is obviously not a great situation. She acknowledged that. But it also doesn't demonstrate that there's widespread voter fraud in New Jersey or anywhere.
In New Jersey? 6,600 non-citizens made it onto the voter rolls. That's okay. To me, is pretty widespread voter fraud.
That's widespread?
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty bad if one person who's not a legal citizen in the United States.
What's the number of registered voters in the state? Do you know?
New Jersey spends $60 billion over that overall on its budget. So I think if we're seeing...
Yeah, but I mean, you just said it's widespread. So where's the proof that it's widespread?
6,600 non-citizens made it onto the voter rolls.
That is 0.006% of registered voters in the state. Mikie Sherrill, she won her
I don't think it invalidates her election.
She won her election by 500,000 votes. There were 3.3 million ballots cast in that election. 400 ineligible voters. Let's say, because we don't even know, let's say they all voted for her, which maybe they did.
Yeah, it still wouldn't invalidate the election.
That would be about 1/100% of all the votes cast. Yeah. Widespread?
Yeah, 6,600 non-citizens made it onto the voter rolls. That's pretty bad. I think.
Hold on, widespread.
Yeah.
6,600 people who were inadvertently registered to vote. The vast majority of them never cast a ballot, and you're calling 400 maybe ballots cast by people who were registered as Republicans, as Democrats, as Independents, as widespread in a state where there are 6.8 million registered voters?
Yeah, I'm with the governor of New Jersey on this. I think it's a pretty big problem.
That math doesn't math. Jesse.
Well, I didn't say it invalidated Mikie Sherrill's election result.
I didn't say you said that, but I also dispute the idea that there's any proof that this is widespread.
I think there are thousands of non-citizens on the voter rolls in New Jersey, and I'm pretty concerned about that. I would call it a widespread problem. I think the bigger problem here is that...
What's your definition of widespread, by the way? Is it 1%? Is it 2%?
I don't know, more than 100? I think it's a big problem. What's yours?
What's your tolerance for this?
Hold on. This is not about tolerance. This is about, is it widespread or is it something that is relatively rare,
You're pounding him over the word widespread. I just would ask you,
Scott,
what is your tolerance for any fraud at all?
Is it widespread?
Absolutely. Over 6,000 people.
What is your bar for widespread?
And she said, my bar is I want no tolerance. Okay. I have zero tolerance.
So what is your tolerance for American citizens?
By the way, this isn't the only place this is happening.
What is your tolerance for American citizens whose valid voter registrations are invalidated by incorrect databases. What's your tolerance for that?
I don't have tolerance for any mistakes in the electoral system, including
Okay, well
putting
then,
non-citizens on the rolls.
So then why are we not keeping the same energy for that as we are for this?
I do have energy. As you know, I've come out here and long argued that every time we don't clean up the voter rolls, that every time a non-citizen makes it onto the voter rolls, it invalidates some legal person's vote.
What about when an
like
American is not allowed to vote when they are eligible to vote?
I don't have any tolerance for that either. An American citizen should be allowed to vote. But American citizens are invalidated
Why are
when
you
illegal
okay
aliens
then with the
are glitched onto the
administration
system.
using a system that a federal judge recently found was actively removing U.S. citizens from the voter rolls based on inaccurate information? Why are you comfortable with that system being used to check the voter rolls?
This is a convenient deflection for you. This is the worst possible story that could happen for Democrats right now regarding the debate over the SAVE Act. 600 illegal aliens on the rolls in New Jersey that you know about.
Can I tell you why I think this conversation is wrong? Because, first of all, this is not the worst possible conversation. This is actually a very good conversation for Democrats because Mikie Sherrill did exactly the right thing. She was transparent.
That's all I was saying.
Let me finish. She was transparent.
And it was good.
She was transparent. She was accountable. She immediately held the people accountable. She removed the software vendor, and she criticized the former governor, who was a Democrat, criticized the former governor for failing to address the problem. That's exactly what a responsible leader is supposed to do. Exactly the opposite of what Donald Trump did in his irresponsible speech last week. Exactly the opposite of what Donald Trump did when he lost the 2020 election and he told the people in Georgia he needs to find 11,780 votes, which, by the way, is voter fraud. This is not an issue about whether it's widespread or not. It's not, because it's really a question about, is it even fraud? This was not fraud. This was a mistake. People were given an option. Are you a U.S. citizen or not? They said no. But the computer system incorrectly registered them to vote. They didn't do anything of their own.
That's a fair
fraud
point.
would require them to do something on their own purposely to defraud the system.
The suggestion that this is fraud suggests that these people were trying to vote when they
400
knew
of
that
them.
they
Yeah,
I think fraud.
Hold on. But let's be honest. I mean, sometimes,
incorrectly.
listen, there's been a lot of work done on situations like this, and going back, state by state, you can go state by state. There have been cases that have looked at it. They found, maybe a couple of dozen cases over the course of 10 years, 20 years. Sometimes what happens is that when state systems are incorrect, people receive information and they are confused, and they're not voting because
this is a great
they're
point.
not voting because they're trying to defraud the system. They might have cast a ballot because they just weren't aware that they were incorrectly put on the voter roll.
They weren't aware that they weren't a citizen of the United States?
No,
They
but the question
said in this instance that they weren't citizens. They were still
Is this accurately described as fraud when none of these people tried to register to vote?
Yes,
They
because
cast ballots. 400 of them cast ballots. They had to actively go do that. I assume no one voted in their name. Maybe they did. I don't know. But they actively cast a ballot. Did they not?
What I want to, but
An illegal alien gets put on the rolls, however they got there, and cast a ballot.
but you
Sounds like
acknowledge
voter
that
fraud to me.
some people might actually be confused, because this has come up in courts before, where some people who are ineligible to vote are not aware that they're ineligible to vote.
Guys, widespread waste, fraud, and abuse doesn't require malice. It can be a product of government incompetence. That's my point from earlier.
Okay, that's a fair. I mean,
you raised the issue.
That's why I said the state of New Jersey spends $60 billion annual. Surely there's a zillion other examples.
I think it's a fair point that it can be due to the government just being dumb about some of these things or making mistakes. But again, I do think it's whether it is widespread or not matters. I do think that the numbers actually matter, because if the argument is that this is so widespread that you need to override the state's constitutional rights to run their elections, then you have to actually prove that that's
National
actually
voter ID is an 80% favorable issue.
The numbers don't prove this conversation of widespread. Language matters. Saying widespread and fraud, it matters when, to the point that you were making and that you were making, if folks were being honest about the fact that they are not citizens, and yet it was a mistake on behalf of the actual machines, and then the Democrat in office took accountability for it, this is actually modeling making sure that our election.
The New Jersey episode looks very different once the full sequence is considered. Governor Mikie Sherrill's administration found a long-running software defect, corrected the records, ended its relationship with the contractor involved, and disclosed the failure publicly. That is what responsible government is supposed to look like. Locate the error, repair the system, and explain the outcome instead of concealing it. Scott Jennings and other Trump supporters framed the situation another way. Their arguments centered almost entirely on the figure of 6,600 non-citizens appearing on registration rolls, using that number to suggest a much larger election scandal. What that framing omits is that virtually none of those registrations led to an actual vote. The handful that did amounted to such a tiny share of the statewide total that they had no realistic ability to affect the result. This is a familiar political strategy. In the aftermath of the 2020 election, ordinary processing delays, clerical problems, and procedural questions were repeatedly elevated into allegations of systemic fraud, even though judges and election authorities found no evidence that those issues changed the outcome. At the same time, Trump's recorded request for Georgia officials to produce enough votes to reverse his defeat is often treated as less significant by the very commentators who present a discovered and corrected software failure as proof that the entire electoral system cannot be trusted. Why elevate a resolved database problem into a nationwide crisis? Because fear about election integrity creates political support for measures like the Save America Act. Once an administrative mistake is presented as evidence that voting systems cannot be trusted, it can be amplified through cable, news and social media until additional restrictions begin to appear necessary. Those restrictions are often felt most heavily by students, low-income citizens, and minority voters. Abby Phillip exposed the inconsistency in that position by pointing to legitimate voters who can be mistakenly purged during aggressive roll-cleaning efforts. Jennings offered little response. When election policies risk excluding citizens who have every legal right to vote, the supposed concern for ballot security becomes noticeably quieter. The alarm appears selective, intensifying when it supports a political goal and fading when the consequences become inconvenient. That is why the scale and nature of the evidence matter more than the outrage surrounding it. Did the registrations produce actual ballots? How significant were those ballots compared with the statewide vote? Was there any indication of a coordinated attempt to manipulate the election? A years-old software defect does not become an organized fraud operation simply because the two are repeatedly discussed, as though they were identical. Sherrill's administration found the defect, repaired the records, dismissed the contractor involved, and informed the public. Jennings removed that corrective context and used the raw figure to construct a broader political accusation. Let me know where you stand in the comments. I read as many responses as I can, and I'll see you in the next video.